Fear and loathing in the digital swamp, a savage journey to the corrupt heart of the American presidency. Forward, a word from the other side. They tell me it's 2025. That's the first joke, and it's not a good one. I was perfectly content in the black velvet silence where the whiskey never runs out, and the deadlines are finally, mercifully, gone. The last thing I remember was the sweet crack of my 45 on that February evening in 2005. Then the beautiful finality of being packed into a cannon and fired across the Colorado sky while my friends got righteously drunk below. Ashes to ashes, blown across Owl Farm by $3 million worth of fireworks. 20 years of perfect oblivion. Then some goddamn necromancer in a lab coat, probably on a government grant, decided the world needed one more dose of the old poison. They clawed me back into this cheap, badly lit mockery of a life for one last assignment. Why? Because the bastards had finally done it. They'd built a political horror show so grotesque, so venally corrupt, that it made the 1972 campaign look like a goddamn church picnic. The sheer, unadulterated, high-proof vulgarity of it was too much for the sanitized hacks they call journalists these days. They needed a professional, someone who stared into the abyss and seen it blink first. This time, it wasn't about secret tapes or a third-rate burglary. No, this was the big one, the final closing out sale of the American soul. They put a price tag on the whole rotten enterprise, the presidency, national security, the free press, the rule of law, and the price was paid in cryptocurrency. Digital noise, funny money for a funny farm nation teetering on the brink of total gibbering madness. So strap in, you poor bastards. The truth is in here, but it's a rabid beast, and it bites. Part 1, The Telltale Edit. Chapter 1, The Silence of the Lambs with Anchors. A rude awakening in the land of the lobotomized. Coming back from the dead is pure crapulence. Every cell in your body is screaming it's supposed to be dead, like the world's worst hangover multiplied by actual death. And the light, Christ, the light feels like a rusty spike being driven through your optic nerve. But the worst part isn't the physical shock, it's the sound. The relentless, soul-killing hum of a world that's been neutered, pasteurized, and vacuum-sealed for your protection. My handlers, a jittery pack of government spooks in off-the-rack suits, sat me down in a sterile white room and pointed at a screen. Reacclimatization, they called it. What it was torture. On the monitor was 60 Minutes, that old warhorse of the public trust, dated November 2nd, 2025. And on that show was the president himself, Donald J. Trump, looking like a bloated Roman emperor carved out of rancid lard. A walking punchline who somehow staggered from tabloid sideshow to the nuclear codes. I watched, I listened, and a cold dread, colder than the cannon I'd been shot from, started crawling up my spine. This wasn't journalism. This was a hostage video. The smell of fear in the control room. The interview was a farce. Nora O'Donnell, a woman who once had the makings of a killer, sat there with the hollowed-out eyes of a Stepford wife. Her questions were softballs lobbed from a great safe distance. The president, in turn, batted them away with his usual barrage of lies and gibberish. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The whole thing felt surgically clean. My old instincts, buried under 2 decades of blessed oblivion, began to scream. You could smell the fear coming off the screen, the stink of pure animal terror from the network suits behind the scene. The story wasn't in what was being said. It was in the silent, gaping holes where the truth used to be. The broadcast ran a pathetic 27 minutes. But the taping, I found out later, had gone on for 73 minutes. 46 minutes of presidential conversation vanished, sucked into a black hole of corporate cowardice. What kind of monster had they seen in that room at Mar-a-Lago? What terrible beast had they captured on tape that sent them scrambling to butcher their own work? Condensed for clarity, a euphemism for a cover-up. CBS, the Tiffany Network, had its story ready. They put out a press release, a sad little scrap of corporate speak, claiming the interview had been condensed for clarity. Clarity. They posted what they called a full transcript on their website, a document so scrubbed and sanitized it was practically radioactive with lies. I checked it myself. Not a single mention of Changpeng Zhao, pardon, or corruption. It was a lie, of course. A bald-faced, piss-on-your-leg-and-tell-you-it's-raining lie. Other outlets, scrappy survivors like the Daily Beast and People, had gotten their claws on the real transcript. They spoke of a corruption tantrum, of screaming matches and dark boasts. They painted a picture not of clarity, but of a frantic, high-dollar cover-up. What kind of truth requires a multi-million-dollar news organization to surgically remove it from the public record? I didn't know yet, but I was beginning to feel the old itch. The darkness was calling. The swamp was deeper and slimier than ever, and somewhere in its black heart, a monster was laughing. Chapter 2. The unaired freaks howl at the moon. The official record is for suckers. The real story is always in the margins, on the cutting room floor, in the panicked whispers of terrified executives, and thanks to the few journalists left in this godforsaken country with a spine. The real transcript of that 60 minutes castration eventually leaked. It was a holy document, a roadmap to the dark heart of the beast, the corruption tantrum. These might be the ones I didn't want. The first cut, the deepest wound, was the part where Norah O'Donnell actually did her job. She cornered the president on the appearance of pay for play surrounding his pardon of a crypto gangster named Changpeng Zhao, a man known as CZ. She connected the dots. CZ's company, Binance, had just greased a massive deal for the Trump family's own crypto grift, World Liberty Financial. And then presto, CZ gets a presidential get-out-of-jail-free card. The president knew the question was coming. Before O'Donnell could even get the words out, the transcript shows him muttering, "These might be the ones I didn't want. I don't know." There it was, the twitch, the tell, the sweaty, paranoid admission of a man with a guilty conscience. A decent journalist would kill for a moment like that. But the eunuchs at CBS cut it. When pressed, he didn't deny the charge. He attacked the question itself. "I could have walked away," he snarled. "I didn't have to answer this question. I'm proud to answer the question." He was proud, you see. So proud that his network lackeys had to bury the evidence of his pride in a digital grave. The unaired words weren't a refutation. They were a confession of motive. He knew it looked dirty, and he answered anyway, calculating that the fix was already in. The $16 million gloat, "I don't want to embarrass you." The second omission explained the first. It was the moment the president stopped being a guest and became a predator, reminding his captors who was really in the cage. He leaned into the microphone and crowed about the lawsuit he'd won against CBS's parent company, Paramount. "And actually 60 Minutes paid me a lot of money," he gloated. Then came the velvet-gloved threat. "And you don't have to put this on because I don't want to embarrass you." He was talking about the $16 million he'd squeezed out of them in a nuisance lawsuit over some editing squabble from the 24 campaign. This wasn't just a boast. It was a reminder. It was the crack of the whip. He was telling Norah O'Donnell, and every suit in the CBS hierarchy, "I own you. I've already made you pay. Cross me again, and the price will be higher." To air that segment would have been to confess their own subjugation, so they cut it. They didn't just hide the president's corruption. They hid the proof of their own castration. The anatomy of a lie. When you lay the two versions side by side, the lie becomes a physical thing, a grotesque, stinking monument to cowardice. In the aired version, the charade that CBS showed you, Trump said about pardoning CZ. "Okay, are you ready? I don't know who he is." About the family business, he claimed, "I know nothing about it." About the prosecution, he said, "I heard it was a Biden witch hunt," and there was complete silence on the Paramount lawsuit. But here's what they hid from you, the raw truth buried in the cutting room. Before O'Donnell even asked the question, Trump muttered, "These might be the ones I didn't want." When she pressed him on how he'd addressed the appearance of pay for play, he responded defensively, "I could have walked away. I didn't have to answer this question." And then came his gloating threat about the settlement. "Actually, 60 Minutes paid me a lot of money. I don't want to embarrass you." The network cut the tape not to protect the president, but to protect themselves. They hid their own complicity, their own yellow-bellied surrender. They sold out the whole goddamn profession for a quiet life and a healthy stock price. And in doing so, they became the story. Chapter 3. The Original Sin of St. Zhao of Binance. To understand the sheer howling insanity of this pardon, you have to understand the man who got it. Changpeng Zhao, CZ, wasn't some poor schmuck railroaded by the system. He wasn't a political prisoner. He was a digital-age gangster, a high-tech Fagin whose only innovation was building a global laundromat for the planet's worst scum. The crime Trump so casually forgave was a direct, bloody threat to the national security of the United States. A digital Silk Road for terrorists. In November 2023, the Department of Justice and the Treasury Department finally lowered the boom on Zhao's empire, Binance. The charges weren't about sloppy paperwork. The feds laid out in excruciating detail how Binance's willful failures to implement even the most basic anti-money laundering protocols had turned the exchange into a financial superhighway for America's enemies. Money flowed like raw sewage through Binance's servers to Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades, Al-Qaeda, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, not a woman known for hysterical outbursts, stated flatly that Binance's business model allowed money to flow to terrorists, cyber criminals, and child abusers through its platform. This wasn't an accident, it was a feature. As the charging documents put it, Zhao consciously prioritized Binance's growth, market share, and profits over compliance. The $4.3 billion slap on the wrist. The scale of the crime was historic, and so was the plea deal. Binance, the corporation, pleaded guilty to a raft of charges and agreed to pay a $4.3 billion fine. But the feds didn't stop there. In a move that sent shockwaves through the C-suites of Silicon Valley and Wall Street, they demanded personal accountability. Changpeng Zhao himself pleaded guilty to a felony. At the time, it was the largest corporate guilty plea in American history that also included the personal admission of guilt from the chief executive officer. It was meant to be a warning shot, a declaration that the days of consequence-free, white-collar crime were over. Zhao got a slap-on-the-wrist 4-month prison sentence and was released in September 2024. He was a convicted felon who ran a financial clearinghouse for terrorists, which raises the central burning question of this whole sordid saga. Who in their right goddamn mind would pardon a man who pleaded guilty to helping finance the people trying to kill us? The answer, it turns out, is a man whose family was getting a taste of the action. Part 2. Building the Beast. Chapter 4. The Freaks of World Liberty Financial. I spent my first week back from the dead in a Motel 6 outside Henderson, Nevada, chain-smoking Dunhills, and wading through the financial documents the spooks had dumped on me. Mountains of SEC filings, prospectuses, blockchain explorer printouts, all of it pointing to the same rotten conclusion. The Trump family was running a crypto company, not investing in one, not endorsing one from a comfortable distance, running one. And not just any crypto company, but a purpose-built influence peddling machine called World Liberty Financial, designed to monetize the American presidency like it was a goddamn shopping mall kiosk selling I Love Democracy t-shirts. I'd known the Trump family since the 80s, back when Donald was just another coked-up real estate grifter bankrupting casinos in Atlantic City. I'd watched his kids grow up, if you can call what they did growing up. Don Jr., the one who shoots elephants for fun and posts the photos like a serial killer's trophy wall. Eric, who always looked like someone had just explained death to him for the first time. And now Barron, the 19-year-old anointed chief DeFi visionary by a father who probably thinks blockchain is a new kind of constipation. World Liberty Financial. Jesus Christ. Even the name was a lie. There was no liberty in it, unless you counted the liberty to convert presidential power into digital funny money. And there was nothing financial about it, except the mob-style rake they were taking off the top. The company's gold paper, because of course these grifters were too good for a plain old white paper, laid it out in black and white. The Trump family, through an entity called DT Marks DeFi LLC, would take 75% of all net revenues. 75%. 3 out of every $4 that came through the door went straight into the president's family coffers. It wasn't a company, it was a stick-up with a prospectus. Chapter 5. The Ghost in the Machine Code. By day 3, I was 6 drinks deep into a bottle of wild turkey and staring at my laptop screen like it was the Zapruder film. Because what I'd found in the blockchain was exactly that level of disturbing. A digital assassination captured frame by frame, impossible to deny, preserved forever in the cold mathematics of the distributed ledger. The Trump family stablecoin, USD1, wasn't just partnered with Binance. It was built by Binance. Code doesn't lie, and this code was singing like a canary with a death wish. I'd gotten help from a kid on Reddit who goes by Deegan420, some autistic savant who lives in his mother's basement and can read smart contracts like I read racing forms. He walked me through it in language even a resurrected journalist could understand. See this function? He typed. Destroy black funds? That's not standard code. That's proprietary Binance shit. It's in their BUSD contract, and now it's in Trump's USD1 contract. Exact same syntax, exact same variable names. They didn't even bother changing it. I pulled up both contracts side by side. He was right. It was like looking at a term paper that had been copied word for word, right down to the typos. The Trump family's billion-dollar crypto empire was running on Binance's code, but it got better, or worse. depending on whether you still believed in things like laws and consequences. The wallet that deployed the USD1 contract, the one that paid the gas fees to birth this abomination onto the Ethereum blockchain, was a known Binance hot wallet, not an anonymous address, not some offshore shell company. Binance Hot Wallet number 1, their main operational account, the one that moves millions of dollars a day. They'd used their own money to create the Trump family's money printer. I sat back and lit another cigarette, watching the blockchain explorer refresh its data every few seconds. Somewhere in Abu Dhabi, or wherever the hell Binance kept their servers now, the evidence was piling up in real time, immutable, and eternal. The beautiful thing about blockchain is that it never forgets. The greedy bastards had created a permanent monument to their own corruption. Chapter 6. A vulture's paradise in the desert. The money trail led where it always leads when you're following presidential corruption in the 21st century, to a Middle Eastern oil kingdom with more money than Allah and fewer scruples than a meth dealer, the United Arab Emirates. I'd been there once in the 90s, covering a story about Russian oligarchs laundering money through Dubai real estate. Even then, it was a fever dream of excess. Gold-plated Lamborghinis, indoor ski slopes in the desert, princes who owned more cars than most Americans own shirts. Now it was apparently the venture capital firm for American presidential corruption. The man with the checkbook was Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Try saying that name 3 times fast after a fistful of dexedrine. He's the UAE president's brother, the national security advisor, chairman of more sovereign wealth funds than I have functioning brain cells. When this man writes a check, it's not a business transaction. It's an act of statecraft with a wire transfer attached. His fund, MGX, was supposedly focused on artificial intelligence and advanced technology, quantum computing, neural networks, the kind of shit that makes you sound smart at Silicon Valley cocktail parties. Their portfolio read like a who's who of the tech future: OpenAI, massive data centers, semiconductor investments. And then, in March 2025, they dumped $2 billion into Binance. A crypto exchange run by a convicted terrorist financing felon. It was like watching Warren Buffett suddenly invest in meth labs. It made no sense, unless you understood that the investment itself wasn't the point. The mechanism of the investment was the point, because that $2 billion wasn't paid in cash or stock, or even normal cryptocurrency. It was paid in USD1, the Trump family's coin, the one that Binance had built. Follow the money, they say. In 2025, the money follows itself and leaves a permanent trail. Chapter 7. The $80 million a year Trump annuity. I finally understood the scam around 4 a.m. on my 5th day back from the dead, sitting in a Denny's parking lot watching the sun come up over the Nevada desert, trying to kill the sheiks with black coffee and nicotine. The $2 billion deal wasn't an investment. It was a perpetual motion machine of corruption, designed to funnel foreign money into the president's family coffers forever. Here's how it worked, and it was so beautifully criminal I almost had to admire it. The UAE deposits $2.1 billion in real U.S. currency into World Liberty Financial's reserve accounts. In exchange, WLF prints $2.1 billion in USD1 tokens and hands them over. It's called mint and transfer, and it's about as organic as a plastic Christmas tree. But here's the genius part. That $2.1 billion in reserves doesn't just sit there. It gets parked in U.S. Treasury bills, earning about 4% interest annually. That's $80 million a year in passive income, generated by the safest, most reliable asset on the planet. And who gets that interest? Not the UAE, not the people holding the tokens. No, that sweet, sweet yield goes to World Liberty Financial, the company owned by the Trump family through their 75% revenue share. $80 million every year, forever, for doing absolutely nothing except existing and being related to the president. It was the perfect crime. The UAE had created an annuity, a permanent fountain of cash flowing from a foreign government directly into the president's family accounts, disguised as yield from a stablecoin reserve. And because it was just interest income, not a direct payment, the lawyers could argue with straight faces that it wasn't technically a bribe. Senators Warren and Merkley, 2 of the few people in Washington who could still do basic math and give a shit about corruption, called it a staggering vehicle for corruption. That was being polite. It was a presidential kickback scheme running on autopilot, documented on the blockchain, hidden in plain sight, and defended by an army of lawyers who charge $2,000 an hour to explain why theft isn't really theft if you use enough syllables. Part 3. The architects of the rot. Chapter 8. A hunter's price in the swamp. Every corrupt court needs its fixers, and in Trump's Washington, that role belonged to a North Carolina swamp creature named Chess McDowell, the kind of glad-handing parasite who'd turned shooting defenseless animals with the president's son into a lucrative career in high-dollar influence peddling. I found him on LinkedIn naturally. Professional photo, big smile. Founder and CEO, checkmate government relations. His entire business model was summarized in one connection: Donald Trump Jr., listed under bear hunting companion and business partner. The origin story was quintessentially American in its venality. In 2016, McDowell met Don Jr. at some masturbatory gathering of congressional hunter types, the kind of event where middle-aged men in camo gear pretend they're Hemingway, instead of the soft-handed city dwellers they really are. Don Jr. had bought a bear hunting trip at a charity auction. McDowell, sensing opportunity like a shark smells blood, sidled up and offered to take him on a real hunt. That December, Jr. was sloshing through North Carolina swamps, shooting a 374-pound bear that had been baited with donuts and Mountain Dew. Very sporting, very primal, the kind of hunt where the only real danger is tripping over a Walmart bag. But the bear was just the beginning. McDowell had bagged bigger game, access to the first family. By 2025, they'd even bought property together, a 1,500-acre hunting preserve they called the Bear Store, because subtlety was never a Trump family strong suit. When Binance needed a pardon for their convicted CEO, they knew who to call. In late September 2025, exactly 30 days before the pardon was granted, Binance hired McDowell's firm. The fee, $450,000 for 1 month of work. That's $15,000 a day, $625 an hour, $10.42 per minute. What was this $500,000 buying? The lobbying disclosure forms, with refreshing honesty, stated the objective: executive relief from the White House. That's Washington speak for get our criminal out of prison. It was fee-for-service corruption, as transactional as ordering a pizza. 30 days, $450,000, 1 presidential pardon. Thank you for choosing Trump's Pardon Emporium. Please rate us 5 stars on Yelp. Chapter 9. The Lawyer with Two Masters. By the time I got to Teresa Goody Guillen, I'd lost the capacity for surprise. My outrage meter had been redlined so many times it just registered a constant flatline of course this fucking person exists. Guillen was a lawyer at Baker Hostetler, which sounds like a hotel chain, but is actually one of those white shoe DC law firms that exist to make criminal conspiracies look like legitimate business. Her specialty? She worked both sides of the same corrupt transaction while somehow keeping her bar license. On one hand, let's call it the right hand, because there's nothing left about this grift, she was representing Changpeng Zhao in his pardon application. Baker Hostetler billed CZ nearly $290,000 for her services, drafting the legal arguments, interfacing with the White House counsel's office, giving the whole sordid affair a sheen of professional respectability. On the other hand, let's call it the left hand, just to complete the image of this moral contortionist, she was also serving as legal counsel for World Liberty Financial, the Trump family company, the one that was financially benefiting from the exact same deal that would benefit her other client if the pardon went through. She was literally being paid by both the briber and the bribed. When members of Congress sent angry letters to WLF demanding answers about the obvious conflict of interest, who do you think wrote the company's response? That's right, Teresa Goody Guillen, defending the company that was paying her to defend the criminal who was also paying her. It was a legal perpetual motion machine, a conflict of interest so blatant it achieved a kind of Zen-like purity. She wasn't just facilitating corruption. She was the human bridge connecting both sides of it. A one-woman clearinghouse for presidential bribery dressed in a $3,000 suit and carrying a briefcase full of billable hours. Chapter 10. The Envoy and the Emeritus. And then there was Steve Witkoff, the piece de resistance of this corruption casserole, the man who embodied everything wrong with Trump's Washington, by serving as both U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East and co-founder emeritus of the family crypto company benefiting from Middle Eastern money. I'd heard the legend before. Witkoff and Trump supposedly became friends in 1986 over a ham sandwich when Trump was short on cash. Heartwarming. Over the decades, that small debt blossomed into a fierce transactional loyalty. Witkoff became a major donor, a trusted member of the inner circle, the kind of friend who's always there when you need someone to commit light treason. So naturally, when Trump needed a Middle East envoy in 2024, he appointed a real estate developer with limited formal diplomatic experience, whose main qualification was personal loyalty and a willingness to blur the line between public service and private profit until it disappeared entirely. The conflict of interest was so massive, it had its own gravitational pull. Steve Witkoff, public servant, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, negotiating with the UAE on behalf of the American people. Steve Witkoff, private beneficiary, co-founder emeritus of World Liberty Financial, a company receiving an $80 million a year annuity from a deal orchestrated by the exact same UAE government he was negotiating with. His son Zach was CEO of WLF. Steve was listed as co-founder emeritus, which is Latin for I'm totally not involved except for all the ways I'm completely involved. The New York Times, in their typically understated way, reported in August 2025 that Witkoff still had a financial interest in the firm while serving as Middle East envoy. Any public servant with a shred of ethical decency would have immediately and fully divested from such a blatant conflict. Witkoff did not. He was negotiating U.S. foreign policy with a foreign government, while that foreign government was simultaneously funding his family's private business. He didn't just blur the line between public service and private enrichment. He erased it, snorted it, and then used the rolled-up $100 bill to light a cigar on Sheikh Tahnoun's super yacht. Part 4, The Grand Bargain. Chapter 11, The Chip Off the Old Blockhead. By day 9, I was starting to understand the full shape of the beast. The pardon wasn't the crime. It was just a party favor, a mint on the pillow after the real business had been transacted. The real deal was so much bigger. I found it in a classified briefing document that someone, probably one of the spooks who'd resurrected me, had accidentally left in my motel room. It detailed U.S. intelligence concerns about G42, the UAE's flagship artificial intelligence company. Same chairman as MGX, Sheikh Tahnoun. Same Sheikh Tahnoun, who just invested $2 billion in the Trump family business. G42 had close ties with Chinese telecommunications corporations like Huawei. Intelligence reports from 2022 suggested they'd transferred sensitive technology to China that ended up improving the People's Liberation Army's missile systems. As a result, the U.S. had slapped export restrictions on advanced AI chips to the UAE, fearing they'd end up in Beijing. Then I looked at the timeline, and my hangover suddenly got worse. May 2025, the private payout. Sheikh Tahnoun's MGX executes the $2 billion deal that creates the Trump family annuity through World Liberty Financial. May 2025, the policy reversal. 2 weeks later, the Trump administration reverses U.S. policy and removes national security restrictions on selling advanced AI chips to the UAE. September 2025, the delivery. Final approval granted for advanced NVIDIA chips to be shipped to G42. It was one transaction, one massive treasonous transaction. The Sheikh paid a private bribe to the president's family through one of his companies, and in exchange, he received a massive public policy concession for his other company. The pardon for CZ? That was just a cherry on top, a cheap favor for a business partner thrown in to sweeten the deal. And who was pushing for this policy reversal from inside the White House? Steve Witkoff, the conflicted Middle East envoy whose family was getting rich off UAE money. David Sachs, the White House AI and crypto czar, whose venture capital firm was backed by Emirati cash. They'd traded American national security for a piece of the crypto action. The chips would flow to the UAE, probably end up in Chinese hands, and meanwhile the Trump family would collect their $80 million a year forever. It was Nixon selling out to the Soviets, but with better technology and worse excuses. Chapter 12, The Payoff Pardon, October 23, 2025, the day the bill came due. President Donald Trump picked up his presidential pen and, with the casual indifference of a man signing a casino deed, granted a full pardon to Changpeng Zhao, convicted terrorist financier. The White House PR machine spun into its well-oiled routine. This was about ending the war on crypto. This was about correcting a Biden witch hunt. This was about supporting American innovation. It was all horseshit, and Trump himself gave away the game in the censored interview. He did it at the request of a lot of very good people. Let's name these very good people, shall we? The paid lobbyists. Ches McDowell, $450,000 for 30 days of bear hunting buddy access to the president's son. Teresa Goody-Gillane, $290,000 to serve two masters and facilitate the entire corrupt bargain. The business partners, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, their company was now flush with $80 million a year in foreign money. Binance just received $2 billion and their CEO walks free. The geopolitical allies, Sheikh Tahnoun, got his AI chips in exchange for funding the Trump family. Steve Witkoff, broker of the deal, beneficiary of the deal, and somehow still employed as a U.S. diplomat. Not one disinterested party. Not one person without a direct financial or political stake in the outcome. When pressed on the obvious corruption in that 60 Minutes interview, Trump's only defense was a simple, provable lie. I don't know who he is. If the pardon were an act of mercy, he would have known the man's story. If it were an act of policy, he would have known the case details. His claim of ignorance is a confession. It proves the pardon was just a line item in a much larger transaction, a box to check on the way to cashing the Sheikh's check. Chapter 13, Laundering Funny Money on the NASDAQ. The final act of this financial theater of the absurd involved converting their mountain of fake crypto tokens into real, spendable American dollars. For that, they needed to rob the public markets, and they did it with a two-step heist that would have made Bernie Madoff weep with envy. Target, a small NASDAQ-listed company called ALT5 Sigma, the kind of forgettable fintech firm that exists mainly to provide a ticker symbol and a patina of legitimacy. Step 1, the cash grab. In August 2025, ALT5 announced it had raised $750 million from institutional investors. But instead of building anything, they immediately used $500 million to buy illiquid WLFI tokens directly from WLF's insiders. The Trump family and their cronies got $500 million in cash. The investors got digital tokens worth less than the electricity needed to store them. Step 2, the control grab. In exchange for their worthless tokens, WLF's insiders received 100 million new shares of ALT5 stock. Suddenly, Zach Witkoff was chairman of the board. Eric Trump had a director's seat. The Trump and Witkoff families now controlled a NASDAQ-listed corporation. They'd laundered their politically inflated funny money, converting it into both hundreds of millions in real cash and a controlling stake in a public company. And what happened to ALT5's stock price after this masterclass in financial crime? It collapsed by 75%. The Trumps and Witkoffs walked away with the cash and the company. The public market investors were left holding a bag of digital dog shit, wondering what the hell had just happened. It was the American dream in reverse, a way to rob the middle class in broad daylight, while the SEC issued a press release calling it innovation. Part 5, the sound of silence. Chapter 14, the pincer movement. The final act of this grotesque drama was not about making money, but about silencing the truth. To ensure their corrupt machine could operate without scrutiny, the Trump administration launched a systematic campaign of coercion against CBS and its parent company, Paramount. It was a textbook pincer movement, a coordinated legal and regulatory assault designed to bring a media giant to its knees and force it into total groveling submission. The $20 billion nuisance. The first arm of the pincer was a legal threat of mind-boggling scale. In October 2024, Trump filed a lawsuit against Paramount over a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, alleging deceptive editing. He initially demanded $10 billion, then upped it to $20 billion. The suit was legally meritless, a frivolous attack on standard journalistic practice. But it wasn't designed to win in court. It was designed to intimidate. By cleverly basing the suit on a Texas consumer protection law instead of traditional libel law, Trump's lawyers aimed to bypass the First Amendment protections that shield the press. It was a nuisance suit, but a $20 billion nuisance suit is an existential threat. The chairman's blade. The second arm of the pincer came from the government itself. Enter Brendan Carr, Trump's hand-picked chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Just days after Trump's 2025 inauguration, Carr took a dormant news distortion complaint against CBS based on the exact same Harris interview and resurrected it as a formal FCC investigation. Docket MB 25-73. The move was nakedly partisan. Carr reinstated similar complaints against ABC and NBC, but, as reports noted, conspicuously ignored a similar complaint against Fox. He was turning the FCC into a political weapon, a blade aimed directly at the administration's perceived enemies in the press. The merger as hostage. Paramount was now caught between a $20 billion lawsuit and a hostile federal regulator. And that's when Chairman Carr delivered the killing blow. He made the connection explicit. At the time, Paramount's corporate survival depended on the FCC's approval of its pending $8.4 billion merger with Skydance Media. In a public statement that can only be described as a smoking gun, Chairman Carr explicitly linked his news distortion probe to the FCC's review of that very merger. The message was unmistakable. It was a transaction trap. The subtext was written in flashing neon letters. Kill the critical reporting, settle the president's lawsuit, and we'll let your company live. Defy us, and we will destroy you. Paramount was caught in a coordinated pincer movement, forced into a quid pro quo where the price of its corporate survival was its journalistic soul. Chapter 15, The Castration of the Tiffany Network. Faced with a choice between integrity and survival, Paramount chose survival. The capitulation was as swift as it was total. The company didn't just bend the knee, it performed a corporate self-lobotomy, systematically dismantling its own journalistic institutions and silencing its most critical voices to appease the man in the White House. It was the public castration of the once great Tiffany Network, the $16 million bribe. In July 2025, Paramount surrendered. They paid $16 million to settle Trump's meritless lawsuit. The money was funneled to Trump's future presidential library, a thin veil of propriety for what it really was, a Trump transaction tax, a payoff. Stephen Colbert, on his late-night show, called it what it was, a big fat bribe. The payoff worked. Just 22 days later, Brendan Carr's FCC approved the $8.4 billion Skydance merger. The hostage was released, the purge. The price of that release was paid in the blood of CBS's news division. The network's leadership, the people who had tried to resist the capitulation, were forced out. Bill Owens, the executive producer of 60 Minutes, resigned in April, stating in a memo that he could no longer make independent decisions. Wendy McMahon, the CEO of CBS News, resigned a month later, writing that, "The company and I do not agree on the path forward." They were principled journalists who refused to go along with the deal. Their resignations were acts of protest, but they also cleared the way for the corporate suits to finalize the surrender without any internal opposition, the Colbert decapitation, and the rise of the new guard. The purge wasn't limited to the newsroom. Just 3 days after Stephen Colbert called the settlement a bribe on his #1 rated late-night show, CBS announced The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was being canceled. The official excuse was financial. A lie so transparent it was insulting. The decapitation of the network's most prominent and powerful critic sent a chilling message to anyone else who might consider speaking out. And to complete the transformation, a new politically compliant regime was installed. Bari Weiss, a conservative pundit, was brought in as the new editor-in-chief of CBS News. In the unaired portion of his 60 Minutes interview, Trump himself praised the new ownership and leadership, calling it the greatest thing that's happened in a long time to a free press. He had bought the company, purged its leadership, and installed his preferred editor. The castration was complete. Chapter 16. Welcome to the bribe-through window. So here we are, at the bitter end of the road, covered in the filth and the fury of it all. What does it mean? What's the final ugly truth we've clawed our way through this digital swamp to find? It's this. They finally did it. The bastards finally put the whole damn country up for sale, and they opened a drive-through window. The new architecture of corruption. This wasn't just another crooked politician taking a bag of cash in a dark alley. No, this was something new, something horribly elegant in its depravity. This was the creation of a scalable, repeatable model for presidential grifting, a new architecture of rot. First, you create a branded influence vehicle like World Liberty Financial. Then you use a conflicted envoy like Steve Witkoff to arrange a deal with a foreign power like the UAE, routing their payment through a purpose-built instrument like the USD1 stablecoin to create a perpetual annuity. You use essential partners like Binance as the pretext for the deal and reward them with the ultimate prize, a presidential pardon. Finally, you use a weaponized FCC and a friendly corporate merger to castrate any media outlet like CBS that dares to report on it. It's a perpetual motion machine of corruption, laundering foreign influence into a risk-free revenue stream, all while you stand on a stage and scream about draining the swamp, the death of shame. The most terrifying part of this whole saga isn't the crime itself. It's the sheer, unadulterated brazenness of it. It all happened in the open. The transactions are recorded on the public blockchain. The conflicts of interest are detailed in press releases and lobbying disclosures. The president's own words, his admissions, and his lies are on tape, and nobody cares. The perpetrators deny the obvious. The press, neutered and terrified, dutifully reports the denials. The public, beaten down by a constant fire hose of outrage and absurdity, just shrugs. The concept of shame is dead. The idea that a public servant should even pretend to serve the public is a quaint, forgotten relic. They are running a criminal enterprise in broad daylight, and they have the gall to call it governance. A final transmission from the edge. I was happy in the dark, but they pulled me back to see this, to see the final, pathetic death rattle of the American dream. I've seen the future, and it's a place where the lines between the government, the mob, and a crypto exchange have dissolved into a single, greasy puddle. It's a world where justice is a commodity, truth is a liability, and the presidency is just another brand to be licensed. So here's a toast, a bitter final toast from the other side, to the suckers, the believers, the poor dumb bastards who still think this whole thing is on the level. You're living in a bankrupt casino, the games are all rigged, and the house is on fire, but the drinks are free. So drink up, you're gonna need it. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a date with oblivion, and this time I'm not coming back.